If you read with me, we're going to be continuing in our series. We're almost done. We're nearing the home stretch here in the book of Acts. And God is doing some amazing things with the Apostle Paul. And I think he's doing some wonderful things in us as we learn what God has done through Paul and through the early church. Amen. We're going to be looking at chapter 27, verses 1 through 13. And read along with me as I read. Verse 1 to 27. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, they proceeded to deliver Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in an Adramyttian ship, which is about to sail to the regions along the coast of Asia, we put out to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul with consideration and allowed him to go to his friends and receive care. From there we put out to sea and sailed under the shelter of Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. When we had sailed through the sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. There a centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy, and he put us aboard it. We had sailed slowly for a good many days, and with difficulty we had arrived off Cnidus, since the wind did not permit us to go farther. We sailed under the shelter of Crete and Salmone, and with difficulty sailing past, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lasea. When considerable time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous, since even the fast was already over, Paul began to admonish them, and said to them, Men, I perceive the voyage will certainly be with damage and great loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. But the centurion was more persuaded by the pilot and the captain of the ship than by what was being said by Paul. Because the harbor was not suitable for wintering, the majority reached a decision to put out to sea from there, if somehow it could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. When a moderate south wind came up, supposing that they had attained their purpose, they weighed anchor and began sailing along Crete, close inshore. May God add the blessing to the reading of His Word. In my life, God has used me as a voice of warning for myself and the welfare and safety of others. Often God has used me to speak a word from Him and speak His truth as a warning, not only for myself, but also for others. Others have listened and others have not. I've listened at times, and other times I've not listened, even to what God was saying to me. And I missed out on what God's best was for me in my life, and missed out on what God's best was going to be for others in their lives, and also, and I hate to say it, but put myself and put others in danger because I didn't listen to what God had to say. Have you ever heard the voice of God telling you to do something or warn you about dangers or difficulties ahead? Has the warning sign or the warning signal gone off with us when God is trying to say something? How have we, when He spoke, was He just speaking for you, or was He speaking to you as a warning to others about things ahead? What was God saying? Was it just for you individually, personally, or was it for you and for others that were a part of your life? What did you do with what God had spoken to you about? How did others respond when you shared it with them? Today we're going to look at Paul, how God had given him wisdom and insight into things to come regarding danger and loss. Paul shared what God had said, but others didn't believe him. And this is going to be, it's a real critical word here that God is saying. And we need to listen and we need to hear what God has to say for His church this morning. We're going to look at three specific points. The first point is sent to Rome. Secondly, embarking to Rome. And then thirdly, warning en route to Rome. sent to Rome, Acts chapter 27, verse 1. It says here in verse 1, they decided they would set sail for Italy. It was a decision they were making, a way for Paul to get there safely. God was using Gentile unbelievers to fulfill his purpose for Paul in Rome. God had a plan for Paul. And so here these Roman officials were making a decision that Paul was going to go to Rome. That was something that God already had predetermined that was going to happen. That Paul was going to go to Rome and that Paul was going to be able to share the gospel in Rome. But these Roman leaders, because Paul had appealed to Caesar back a couple of chapters prior to this, had appealed to Caesar, they had no other choice. So God was using Gentiles or unbelievers to help accomplish what God already planned and purposed for Paul. Often, you see what God does here is that God has a purpose that He wants to accomplish. God has a plan, and He has a purpose that He wants to bring about. And for us in our personal lives and for others. And God is saying that I want you to do these things. And in obedience, we do those things, but yet God will use unbelievers to help fulfill what He wants to accomplish in our lives. And so here, what was the first step that they did? They made a decision to do what? To get Paul. Paul needed to go to Rome, so they made a decision to do what they needed to do in order to get this process going of getting Paul to Rome to finish his journey. So we see here, it says they made a decision in verse 1. Let's go on to, they decided they would set sail for Italy. Number 2 is, and if you look at verse 1, they proceeded to deliver Paul to the centurion. They acted upon their decision. So in other words, they decided that Paul was going to go to Rome, and so they made arrangements for that to happen. And number 2 is that they proceeded to deliver Paul to a centurion. So they acted on that decision. They acted and again began being used by God, and they didn't even know it. And sometimes when Gentiles are being used by God, they don't even know it to accomplish what God wants to do in and through us. So they made a decision, and they acted upon the decision. They handed Paul over. So now the process is in place. And where is Paul going? Paul is going to Rome, which God already, again, had predetermined what happened. And that He wanted to do, Paul to do things there that he wanted to accomplish. Now, it didn't say that it was going to be a smooth ride along the way, but God was going to make sure that Paul was going to be okay. God was going to make sure that whoever was with him was going to be okay if you followed His instructions. If you follow what God says to do, you're fine. If you're out of His will, if you don't follow His direction, if you don't follow His instructions, you could be in a pickle, so to speak. So, and you could have trouble and difficulty and danger along the way. Believe me, I've had that happen where I didn't listen to God and I got myself in a big pickle. And it caused me a lot of heartache and a lot of difficulty. Where I should have listened to God and listened to the warning signs and seen the red flashing lights. Like when we see, for example, when we see on the road and they're doing road work. This past week at my job, the road that my job's on, they were doing a lot of construction. They're repaving the road. But there's a lot of warning lights, a lot of things going on, telling me that they're paving the road and you better do something in order to be prepared for an inconvenience or for possible danger that may happen if you don't listen to what they have to say. So that's what God does in our lives, is that He sends warning lights and He sends signals to us, but we have to heed those warning lights. If we don't, if there's a bridge out down the road and there's a warning light saying, bridge out, we say, well, I got this. I can handle this. And if we don't listen to what God's saying, we can potentially put ourselves and those who are with us in danger. If we don't listen to what God has to say. We just can't brush God off. We just can't brush what He's saying off. We have to listen to His voice. We have to be obedient to what He is saying. Okay, then let's go on to our second point. It says here, embarking to Rome. This is Acts 27, verses 2 through 8. It says here, in verse 2, it says they put out to sea. Now they're on their way. So here they are. They made a decision. They acted on the decision. They gave Paul into the hands of the centurion. And now the ship is sailing. And now this is, again, a part of God's plan. They're fulfilling God's plan, and they're fulfilling His purpose. And at this point, things are going okay. And God, it looks like that God's going to accomplish for Paul what he wanted him to accomplish without any problems. But God is so gracious, and a journey is underway. God's in control, and He'll make sure that Paul gets to Rome and fulfills His purpose. God's going to make sure that that happens. And then look at verse 3. It says here, it says, Paul was treated with compassion. The favor of God. Isn't it neat how God grants His people favor? How God allows Paul to have even compassion at the hands of Gentiles or unbelievers who are supposed to be those in authority and supposed to be those who are having problems, who can have the right to treat us harshly. But in this case, they're allowing Paul to be shown a little compassion. See how God's merciful here? God's using Gentiles to show compassion to Paul and to his people. Well, let's go on here. The voyage in verses 4 through 8, the voyage continues, but there's some difficulties here. We see here in the journey that there's some difficulties that are there. So there's some difficulties that are happening along the sailing. If you look at these, and look at verse 8. And with difficulty sailing past, we came to a place called Fairhaven, near which is the city of Lasea. So there was difficulty with the sailing. There may have been rough waters. There may have been waves. The boat may have been rough. There may have been all kinds of things going on. But it says here there was some difficulty. So that should have been a precursor. That should have been a warning to everyone that maybe this journey may not go as smooth as we would like it to. So that may have been, that's always sometimes a warning sign. If you see things happening, in other words, you are aware, you're keen, you're aware of your surroundings. I'm not always real good with that. I'm not always as aware of my surroundings as I should be, and alert. But here in this case, this should have been a warning sign that maybe there's some things that are up ahead that I need to be aware of, and I need to be prepared in order to see what's happening down the road on this journey called life, and this plan that God has for me in my life. God's called me to do something. I'm on my way. I'm doing what God's called me to do, and yet I hit some rough waters, and I need to go, and I need to prepare. If I see, maybe I just need to be alert as to what's going on. There might be some things there that are going on, so I need to be ready and alert. So as we go on here, and that's just a warning, and that warning sign, that's just having an understanding of things, a perception of things, using wisdom, using foresight. Something that we need to look at and say, okay, I just need to be prepared. Like you're not caught off guard, like you're just it's like moseying on down the road without a care in the world, and you're oblivious to everything else that's going on around you. You need to be aware and alert of what's going on, lest you be caught off guard. One of the things I learned as the Lord was just showing me is that King David, one of the great things about made him a great king is he had great people around him and helped him be a good king. Great king. And it said about the men that were around him, there were some men there that, and leaders there that understood the times. They understood the times. And when we have an understanding of our current circumstance, we have an understanding of our current situation, we have an understanding of what's going on, we're aware and we're alert. We're not naive to what's going on. And that's an important part as Christians, as believers. A good soldier is what? Is alert. He's aware of his surroundings. He's alert and he's aware of what's going on. He's astute. He takes notice of things. Something's out of place. Like the animals are aware of that. They see the leaves turn, the wind starts blowing a little bit, and the leaves start turning up. The animals know, I better get some shelter. Why? Because they know that the storm's coming. When you see the underside of the leaves of the tree, that's a trigger that tells you that, hey, there's some danger ahead, I better go take it, and I better get some shelter. And I think that that's the same thing with us, is that we need to be aware of the signs, we need to be alert of the times that we're in. And we need to be alert of the signals that are going on around us. And so Paul here was alert to the things that are going on. And you think Paul's got things under control. It says, in verse 9, it says, the voyage becomes dangerous. Look at that. Let's look at verse 9. It says, when considerable time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous. So here we have, that's another sign. They were facing some difficulties, but now the trip has become dangerous. There's some difficulties that are going on here. And so that's another warning. Another great difficulty has become dangerous at this point. And Paul, and the fast, during this time, it says when the fast was over, this was the time of year during the Jewish holiday when Paul was fasting. Why? Because it was the Day of Atonement. And the Day of Atonement happened during the months of either September or October, this time of the year that we're in now. And so that's what they were talking about. And during that time, in the Mediterranean, during that time of the year, the waters could potentially be dangerous. And there could be storms in there at this time of the year, between September and October, that time of the year. So the waters were getting a little choppy. That should have been another sign that, hey, something's ahead, something's going on, I need to be alert, I need to be aware. And I need to be prepared. I cannot blow off any warnings that God's saying. If God is saying, if you're seeing stuff and stuff's not right, and stuff is not the way it should be, or the things are not going the way they should be, that should be a warning sign, a signal to us that something's going on or something is going to happen. You understand the signs, just like David's men. They understood their times that they were in. They understood the seasons. And Paul understood the seasons. He knew Paul was not a sailor by any means, but Paul understood that this time of the year, that the waters in the Mediterranean can be a little dangerous for sailing. And so you better be aware. You better be prepared. You better take notice. So Paul was just being wise. Paul was just using the intellect that God had given him, the wisdom that God had given him. He's noticing of things around him about what was going to happen. Let's go on here. In verse 9 and 10, if you read the end of verse 10, it says here, and Paul began to admonish them. Look at verse 9. So the word is getting dangerous. So what does Paul do? He begins to admonish them. It said, men, I perceive the voyage will certainly be with damage and great loss of the cargo and our lives. That's a pretty strong warning, isn't it? That I perceive that there will be great loss of cargo and lives. I don't know how much stronger a warning that you can get. That's pretty strong. But listen to this. Paul acted with wisdom from God. He understood the seasons, he understood the signs, but also God clued Paul in that there was going to be danger ahead and that they should seek safety and wait before moving on. Not only was Paul have to use the wisdom that God had given him, not only did Paul use the understanding that God had given him, as just from a natural perspective and just from a wisdom perspective and understanding things and seeing things, but also God spoke to him. And God clued him in that there was danger ahead and we better take shelter, we better take safety before proceeding on. Now that's coming from if you're a fisherman, that's coming from a layman. Paul wasn't a fisherman. Paul wasn't a captain. He wasn't a seaman. But he did know one thing. When he recognized danger, he knew what it was. But he also heard from God. And it's so important, so critically important. When Paul heard from God, Paul listened. It was an old commercial, and I don't know if many of us remember it. It was years ago. It says, when E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen. E.F. Hutton was a financial person. And so you listen, people listen. Well, when God speaks, what's the right thing to do? You listen. You hear what he's saying. And God was speaking through whom? Paul. And what was Paul saying? Paul was saying, there's danger ahead. We need to slow things down a little bit. I know you want to get me safely to Rome, but we need to slow things down a little bit. We need to maybe stop at this harbor here and winter here, rather than going further, and let these storms pass, and then we can proceed on in safety. But listen what happens here. In verse 11, the centurion was more persuaded by the pilot and the captain than by Paul. Well, after all, the pilot and the captain knew the seas, didn't they? They should have known the seasons. They should have known the signs. Here, these were the people that should have known all the right answers and knew what to do, right? But sometimes people with all the answers and all the knowledge don't act with wisdom. They don't act with the God-given knowledge and experience that they have, and they don't use it the way they're supposed to. How many times have we seen that happen? People who should know, who should have the answers, the experts, should know really the answer, and they don't, and they're suggesting things that don't make sense. And they're really not listening. And we trust them more than we trust God and what God is saying. I'm not saying you don't trust what people and the experts have to say, but at the same time, you have to listen to what God's saying. Over and above what so-called experts have to say. Because sometimes, just because they're experts, doesn't mean they know what they're doing. It's true. If God's spoken to you, God knows the end from the beginning. He's sovereign. He knew you while you were yet in your mother's womb. He knew the day, how many days you were before, how many days you would have before you had yet one of them. You look at Psalm 139. It tells you all of that. So God knows your life. He's got it all under control. Man doesn't. So if God's warning you and telling you about something, about your journey in life, or the thing, the plan, and the purpose that He has for you, then you better heed and take warning. Look at the signs again. Use your wisdom and see what God's doing. But also, when He's speaking to you in your heart, you need to listen. You can't turn a deaf ear. You can't. You cannot turn a deaf ear and say, I know better. I got this. Or I'll put this off. I procrastinate. I personally procrastinate. I put things off. And it's a very bad habit that I have in my life. And what it is, procrastination is, it's just putting off what God's already told me to do. Or I know to do. And that can be dangerous. Not that I don't believe God, it's just so I got time. And you don't know how much time you have. You do not. None of us are guaranteed tomorrow. None of us are guaranteed the next moment. None of us. When God says we're done, we're done. Well, we better be prepared when we go out. Or when things happen. We need to be prepared. And so therefore we cannot ignore, I can't emphasize enough, we cannot ignore the voice of God. And the wisdom that God has spoken to us. And let's go on here. The centurion, we look at, let's look at verse 12. Because the harbor wasn't suitable. Okay, this was his reasoning. Look at this. The harbor wasn't suitable. What does that mean? It means that it wasn't comfortable. It wasn't convenient. How many times have we made decisions foolish decisions based on, well, it wasn't comfortable, it wasn't convenient. The harbor wasn't suitable. Oh, it doesn't feel good to me. I'm not comfortable here. And you make a decision, a foolish decision, based on what? Convenience or comfort. That's what happens. And this is what they did. They was based on comfort and not safety. God was warning them. You know, it may not be the best harbor here, I mean, the most comfortable harbor, but it's safe. Until the storms ride over, until the storms pass, until you can get safely going to where you need to go. They were looking to spend the winter at Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, which would have been a more comfortable winter. I mean, a more comfortable harbor in order to spend their time. They knew that they had to get there. Let's just try and get to Phoenix. Let's just try and do it. And what they were trying to do was take the ball in their own hands. They know better. I got a better plan. I got a better decision. I got a better choice. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And I'm going to do this. And it looks better. Always looks better, doesn't it? It always looks better. But in reality, if it's not God's plan, it's not better. And there's danger, and there can be danger or problems or difficulties along the way. If it's not His plan, if it's not God's plan, we better beware. And then verse 13. It says, a moderate south wind arose. As a result, they supposed that they had achieved what they were looking for, had achieved their purpose. And what was that purpose? What was their purpose? Was to find, which was to find a harbor in Phoenix. To them, that would be safe and convenient. That was their purpose. So they think, oh, okay, we're setting sail. We got a nice wind here. I mean, I've been out in the ocean, boats, and I mean, I haven't been real far out in the ocean, but I've been out there. And when it's nice out, gorgeous, beautiful. The ocean's calm, it's nice, and it's great. And you think, wow, this is the best thing ever. But then, when it's choppy out there, it's a whole nother story. It's a whole nother story, and it can be pretty scary. Yeah. It can be pretty scary. But here they're thinking, the seamen, wow, I got moderate fair weather, even though they knew that that time of the year a storm could come up at any moment. Well, I got fair weather. They must think, well, this must be, we got, see, Paul, we got you. You told us that we got problems, but look at this, fair weather. Sky is blue, like the old Willie Nelson song, Blue Skies. And they're thinking, well, that's like a blue sky, not a cloud in the sky. And all of a sudden, boom. They're thinking they're on their way and they're going to accomplish what they want to accomplish. And they're going to achieve the purpose for which they have set out. And then it all comes crashing down. It was a fault, so they're on their way and they go close to Crete. They're going to go to Phoenix and hopefully, I'll stay close to shore. We'll stay close to inland. We'll be okay. It was a false supposition for God. They knew, or God knew what was up ahead. They make these suppositions, but it's just because I have sunshine out, it's okay. They make conclusions based on the moment, rather than looking at what God already told them about the future. Think about that. And so they make these assumptions, they make these suppositions and these assumptions that aren't true. And for God knows what's ahead. God knows our days, folks. I can't emphasize that enough. God knows our days. He knows our moments. He knows the breaths that we're going to take. He knows the thoughts that we're going to think even before we think them. Scripture tells us that. He does. So we need to look at the signs, folks. We need to look at the signs. God has a plan for our lives. He has a purpose, and there's a journey. And He's telling us you need to travel on this journey. And along the way, He has specific plans that He wants to accomplish along the way. Like Paul needed to go to Rome. That was only one part of Paul's plan. But in the end, God was trying to make sure that Paul got there safely to accomplish what he needed to accomplish. But for us, God tells us things along the way that he wants us to accomplish. And we need to hear his voice and say, okay, God, I'm going to do what you tell me to do. I'm going to be obedient to it. For example, like when God was saying, I want you to be a pastor, I had to be obedient to God and listen to what his voice said. I could have said so many other things. But the reality is that I needed to hear God and be obedient to that. And thank God it was. Has it been rough? Has it been rough along the way? Yeah, there's been some rough spots and rough patches along the way and difficulties, and it hasn't always been easy. Well, life never is, but God uses those times in order to strengthen us, encourage us, and build us up. But the reality is that there are signs in my life, there were signs that God was showing me that there's a rough patch ahead, there could be rough seas ahead, and you need to take warning. You need to be aware, you need to be alert, things are coming, so you don't get caught off guard, so you don't put yourself in danger. You need to hear what I'm saying. Look at the signs, look at the things that I'm giving you. But look at the weather. Look at the different things. Look at how the animals respond. Look at the birds, how they respond when there's a storm. Look at the different things that I've given you. The God-given wisdom and insight and senses that I've given you, and the wisdom that I've given you, look at them and use them as a key to maybe there's things that are going on that I need to be alert and aware. But then also God will clue you in, will speak to you in a still small voice. He'll say, okay, you need to make preparations. Things are going on, things are going to happen. I want you to be aware. I want you to be alert. I want you to be prepared. And that's what we need to do. And that's the whole God's point. Because God wants to keep us safe, doesn't he? He wants us to keep us safely. He wants to bring us safely home to that shore, so to speak. That shore which is what? Heaven. And so life is a journey. And things along the way, God clues us in, and God speaks to us, and God shows us, and God gives us direction. And we need to hear his voice. And just one last thing, and this was something that I was talking to my wife about. And this is so important, and lest we miss out. I remember there was some people that I knew, that we knew, that they had some real challenges. We hadn't seen this. It was some people that we knew that we hadn't seen in a long time. And God was telling me, this was like even maybe a couple weeks ago, even last week. Why don't you just give them a call? See how they're doing. See what's going on. See what's happening. And I kept, me being the procrastinator, I kept putting it off. I'll get to it. And I would get some news the other day, and they had a tragic loss in their family. And had I been obedient to God, I could have somehow maybe encouraged them even beforehand, not knowing what's going on, just being support there even beforehand. Had I been aware, because God was cluing me in, God was cluing me in, God was cluing me in, God was cluing me in. And we need to be aware of those clues, folks. If God's telling us to call someone, we need to call them. If God tells us to do something, we need to do it. Don't brush off God's warning. Do it. That's an encouragement.